Morning, children. So, we had started with the lesson of agriculture and we completed the first lesson, that is Agriculture Part 1. So, today we start with a new chapter, Agriculture Part 2, that is Food Crops. So, when we were doing the salient features of Indian agriculture, we had studied that Indian agriculture is largely dominated by food crops. That is because India has a very huge population. So it has a very huge population to feed. That is why a lot of emphasis is laid on the cultivation of food crops. So the important food crops grown in India are rice, wheat, barley, maize, millets, pulses. So in this chapter, we will be studying about the food crops. So the main food crops fall under the category of cereals. The term cereals denotes all kinds of grass-like plants which have starchy edible seeds. So the most common cereals are rice, wheat, barley, maize, rye, oats and millets. Because of the simple form of cultivation and their high nutritional value, they have formed the basic diet of mankind. So children, we'll start with the first cereal or the first food crop, that is rice. So children, rice is a staple food of India. Staple meaning something that is consumed every day. So especially it is a staple food for people living in Northeast India and the southern part of the country. In North India, rice is a kharif crop, whereas in South India it can be cultivated throughout the year as long as irrigation is available. Now another thing about rice is that it can be grown on different altitudes as long as the temperature and water requirements are favorable. For instance, it can be grown in the hills of Kashmir, in the terraces. You must have heard about terrace farming, in which the hillsides are cut into steps. So it can be grown in the mountainous areas also, and it can also be grown in the lowland areas. So because of this, it is said that there are about 10,000 different varieties of rice in the world, out of which about 4,000 types are grown in India. So children, there are three different types of rice, as you can see. The rice which is grown in well-watered lowland plains, or those which are grown in the plains, they are referred to as wet or lowland rice. The next is when the rice is grown on the hill slopes, where the hills are cut into terraces. There it is called terraced cultivation. The supply of water to hilly regions is not as much as in the plains. So the rice grown in these hilly areas is called dry or upland rice. Now children, let us see the favorable conditions for the cultivation of rice. The favorable geographical conditions. So when we talk about geographical conditions, it includes the soil, it includes the climatic conditions. Now here a word of caution children for all of you. When we ask you for the soil, then you mention only soil. If we ask you about climatic conditions, in that you will only mention about temperature, rainfall conditions. You will not include soil under climatic conditions. But when we ask you geographical conditions, in that you must write about the soil as well as the climatic conditions. So there are certain climatic conditions which are suited to the cultivation of all the crops. Alright, so like for example, we do not find tea or we don't see rice being grown everywhere. That is because it requires a set of favorable geographical conditions for its cultivation. So let us see that. First of all, let us see the soil. It requires deep fertile clay of friable loams. Children, the word friable means the soil which can be easily crushed between fingers. Alright, and loam is a soil which has equal quantity of sand and clay. So it requires deep fertile clay of friable loams. Even black soil is favorable for cultivation of rice because it retains moisture. Thus, this soil, because it can be grown in loamy soil also, in black soil also, so it is a crop of the lowlands, the river valleys, the floodplains, the deltas, and the coastal plains. The next is that rice does not require aerated soil. Aerated soil meaning in which the circulation of air is good. It requires a lot of water. Soil which can retain a lot of water is favorable for the cultivation of rice. Now let's study about the climatic requirements. First, the temperature. So it requires an average temperature of about 24 degrees centigrade with a range of 16 to 32 degrees centigrade. So children, please remember this, that whenever you are asked about the climatic conditions, you must mention the range. Just don't end up by saying rice requires a temperature of 24 degrees centigrade. Mention this entire range, that it requires a temperature range of 16 to 32 degrees centigrade. Now during growing season, it requires a temperature of 18 to 32 degrees centigrade at the ripening stage, and it requires plenty of sunshine. Next is rainfall. It requires 150 to 200 centimeters of rainfall. It needs flooded fields. That means it requires a lot of stagnant water in the earlier part of its growing season. Slight rain before ripening helps in increasing the size of the grain. So, the geographical requirements of rice are plenty of sunshine, heavy rainfall, irrigated deep alluvial clay soil, and plenty of labor to work on the fields, as it requires a lot of manual labor. Now children, let us study about the planting techniques for rice. So it can be in India, rice is sown in the following ways. The three most important ways are broadcasting, drilling, and dibbling. So children, the first method of sowing rice is broadcasting method. In this method, it is generally the seeds are scattered all over the field after plowing the field. So this is done before the onset of monsoon, and this method is generally prevalent in those regions where the labor is scarce and where the soil is infertile. Children, the second method is the dibbling method. A dibble is an implement for making holes in the ground for seeds or plants. So the dibbling method refers to sowing of seeds at regular intervals in the furrows or the holes which have been made by hand. So you can clearly see the picture of the method of dibbling, how the holes have been made in the soil and how the seeds are planted by hand. However, children, this method is a very time consuming method. Now children, the third method is the drilling method. So in this, the farmers generally use the plow, and the seeds are dropped through a bamboo shaft attached to it in the furrows made by the plow in a straight line. Okay, as you can see in the picture. So though this method saves wastage of seeds, it is very time consuming. So sometimes what is done is that the seeds are soaked in water for a few hours before sowing. So it helps in quick germination, especially where the soil is not moist enough. So this method also, children, it is practiced mainly in Tamil Nadu in peninsular India. Now children, the next method is transplantation. So this method is practiced in areas of fertile soil, abundant rainfall, plenty of sunshine, and of course a lot of labor force is required. So in this method, first the seeds are sown in nurseries after soaking them in water for 24 hours. After 4 weeks, when the seedlings are about 20 centimeters tall, they are uprooted and they are planted in the flooded fields so that they can grow there again. So it requires a lot of manual labor because the work has to be done by hand. So what is done is that uh, these when these saplings, when they grow, then they are transplanted into prepared fields in groups of 4 or 6 at a distance of 30 to 45 centimeters. So in the beginning the field is flooded with a 2 to 3 centimeter deep water. Subsequently the depth of water level is increased to 4 to 6 centimeters till the crop matures. So this method of rice cultivation is popular because it gives a higher yield. Now, advantages of transplanting method is that only the healthy plants are picked for resowing in the field and the unhealthy plants are discarded. Similarly, when resowing is done, then the weeds are removed. There is less wastage of seeds as compared to the broadcasting method, and this method gives higher yield. Now children, the next method is the Japanese method. This method is an improved form of transplantation method introduced in 1953 and it has gained wide popularity in the recent years. In this method, high-yielding variety seeds called Japonica are used. It includes the following practices. As in the previous method, the seedlings are prepared in nurseries. The rows of plants are fixed at a distance of 25 centimeters. Similarly, the distance between the plants is about 15 centimeters. It is easy for the farmer to give proper care to the plants by weeding them. The manure is used extensively to increase the yield. So the japonica seeds, they give a much more higher yield. So that is why it is much more popular. Now children, let's study about harvesting and processing. The fields are drained dry just before the crop is harvested. The traditional cutting of the stalk is simple. A sickle, which is a kind of a curved knife, it is used for this purpose. It is labor intensive. So children, the process of harvesting is labor intensive, meaning it requires a lot of labor as each stalk is hand reaped. Each stem is cut about 60 centimeters below the grain to facilitate threshing. The moisture content of the crop is reduced by drying the stalks in the sun. Now children, this is a picture of threshing. Threshing is done by beating the sheaves against the wooden bars. The grains are separated from the stalk. Threshing is done in the rice fields in order to minimize the cost of transportation. So in this picture you can see how threshing is being done. Then children, next is the process of winnowing. It is a process of removing the unwanted husk from the grains. The simple method involves pouring the grains from the height on a windy day when the grains fall to the ground and the chaff is blown aside. Chaff means that, the outer covering. Then children, milling. Milling is done to remove the yellowish husk from the grains. Traditionally, the villagers used to hit the grain in a wooden mortar with a heavy pestle. This resulted in a high percentage of broken rice. So modern milling is done by machines. Now children, you can see the picture of unpolished rice and the polished rice. Now children, the polished rice has a glossy texture but it lacks nutrition as much of its vitamins are lost due to excessive rubbing. After this, children, the polished rice is graded and stored in sacks. Now children, the diseases. There are certain pests and diseases that are harmful for rice and they are responsible for the low yield of rice. So there are different diseases like the the pests and diseases like rice tungro virus, the green leaf hopper, rice case worm, paddy stem worm, just to name a few. Now let us see the problems of rice cultivation. So the rice yield per hectare is low. Therefore, it is very important that HYV, that is high yielding varieties of seeds, should be used. Fertilizers, mainly I think children, mainly the manure should be used. Because chemical fertilizers, they are generally harmful in the long run. So manures should be used. Then insecticides must be introduced to increase rice yield per hectare. Then another problem faced by the farmers is that they do not get a suitable price for their crop as the middlemen buy cheaply at the harvest time and sell it at a higher price later. Then proper storage of rice is not available, due to which sometimes the entire harvest gets spoiled due to the lack of storage facilities. Then there are various diseases that damage the rice crop, and thus they reduce the yield. So these are the problems. In India, rice is grown in almost all the parts of the country except the very high altitude areas of the Himalayas. So there are actually the main rice producing areas are the lower and middle Gangetic plains, the Brahmaputra Valley, east and west coastal regions, parts of peninsular plateau, especially Tamil Nadu. So, West Bengal is the largest producer of rice in India because of the favorable climatic conditions. The region being in the lower Ganga Valley, it has fertile alluvial soil which enables the farmers to grow three crops a year. So, in West Bengal, the farmers grow three crops of rice called Os, Aman, and Boro. The next producer is Tamil Nadu, which has the distinction of giving a yield of 3000 kgs per hectare, which is the highest for the whole country. So this is mainly because of the green revolution, the introduction of high yielding variety seeds or HYV seeds, fertilizers, improved irrigation facilities. Then the other producers are Uttar Pradesh, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Punjab, Odisha and Bihar.